So, as Krugman points out in his column, if you take the proposals from Cruz and Patrick and these other white devils, if you take it literally, these proposals amount to a call for turning the United States, the land of the free, into a giant armed camp. Here you go. There are around 130,000 K-12 schools in America. There are close to 40,000 supermarkets. And there are many other venues that might offer soft targets for mass killers. So, if you want to do what the fascist Christians say to protect all of these public spaces, it will require creating a heavily armed, domestic only, armed force, heavily armed, because it will face attackers with body armor and Kalashnikovs and AR-15s and all sorts of military-style assault weaponry. And it would require a domestic military force that would be at least as big as the Marine Corps. Now, the question then immediately comes up, why would such a thing be necessary? Well, first of all, we have to realize what we've been told, what we've told ourselves over and over again, that mass shootings are very rare outside the United States. And then the question would come up, why are they so common here? And according to the Nazis in this country, it's not because we're a nation where an 18-year-old can easily buy military-grade weapons and body armor. No. Dan Patrick says it's because, quote, we're a coarse society, end quote. You fucker. It is people like Dan Patrick who have made it coarse. It's people like the Supreme Court who say to a woman, fuck you, it's not your body. Not all of it. Your boobs, okay, you can keep those. Your vagina, well, up to a point. Coarse society, Mr. Asshole Patrick, it's because of people like him that we have gotten to this point. Krugman says it's hopeless to say this, but imagine the reaction. If a prominent liberal politician, pick one, were to declare that the reason the United States has a severe social problem that doesn't exist elsewhere is because Americans are bad people, we'd never hear the end of it. But when a Republican scumfuck like Dan Patrick says it, it barely makes a ripple. He said, quote, we're a coarse society. And for the record, who believes that Americans as individuals are worse than anybody else? Krugman wants to ask. He says, if anything, what has always struck me when returning from trips abroad is that Americans are, or were, on average, exceptionally nice and pleasant to interact with. But what distinguishes us is the fact that it's so goddamn easy for the slime, the filth in this country, who aren't nice, to arm themselves to the teeth. And the fascist Christians want it that way. They want it that way. Who are the victims so often of these mass shootings? Whether it's in a church in South Carolina or a nightclub in Florida, or another church in Southern California, or a school in South Texas. Who so often are the victims? Who are the people who are gunned down in the street so often as they're running away from a heavily armed cop? Who are the people shot dead day in and day out? Easier question. What color is their skin? What texture is their hair? How are their facial features different from those of white people? You take my point. I know you do. Krugman writes, okay, I think everyone realizes that none of what Republicans are saying about how to respond to mass shootings will translate into actual policy proposals. They're barely even trying to make sense. Instead, these fascist Christians are making noise to try to drown out the rational discussion about eliminating these instruments of death from society. This fascist Christian ideology that it's impossible to accept high death rate in this country from guns is an acceptable price for someone else to pay so these cowardly pieces of shit can carry their weapons around and pretend like they're men or women, and they're not. It's an acceptable high price to pay the slaughter of children. So I wonder if these NRA fuckwads or these fascist Christians, if somebody were to gun down their baby, their mother, their grandma, their sister, their toddler, their middle school student, would you feel the same, you son of a bitches? I don't think you would call that acceptable so you could walk around with a gun pretending that you were a big man when you're really a little piece of shit that's scared to death. That's why you carry a weapon. But Krugman takes it one step further. He says we're looking at a broad assault on the very idea of civic duty. You know, the idea that people should follow certain rules and accept some restrictions on their behavior in order to protect the lives of other citizens of this country. We don't have that here anymore. In other words, we should think of vehement opposition to gun regulations, which you hear coming out of the filthy mouths of these fascist Christians constantly. We should hear that or think of it as a phenomenon closely linked to also vehement and highly partisan opposition to the mask mandates and vaccination in the face of a deadly panic. Or this right-wing fascist Christian insane opposition to environmental rules. Like, this is reaching back, but the ban on phosphates in detergent, that's from the 70s, right? And more. These fucking right-wingers, these fascist Christians, hate it when an area is designated as a wetland. Oh, what, to protect a frog? So the question is, where does this hatred of the idea of civic duty come from? And there's no doubt, in my mind, or what Krugman wrote, that like almost everything in U.S. politics, some of it is related to race. How many of these white devils would even think of cooperating with their black neighbors or brown neighbors? Krugman writes this, one thing it doesn't reflect, however, is our national tradition. When you hear talk of homeschooling, remember that the United States basically invented universal public education. And environmental protection used to be a nonpartisan issue. The Clean Air Act of 1970 passed the Senate without a single no vote. Okay, that was 50 years ago. Christ, it seems like not very long ago to me. And if you set aside Hollywood movies and the 10-gallon hat shit and the six-shooter and the guy who could stand 100 yards away from a bad guy and shoot a gun out of the bad guy's hand, look at that. No, I think I'll wing him in the shoulder. Boom. Oh, I got him in the shoulder. If you cast aside that horse shit, most towns in the Old West had stricter limits on the carrying of firearms within the city limits than Greg Abbott's Texas. This shit didn't come out of the Old West. This is not the American genocidal tradition. This is not, let's go eliminate the indigenous people. I'm a cowboy. Look at me. I'm going to ride horse. Look at my great big old cowboy hat. Look at those fuckers who sat there at that press conference on Tuesday after the slaughter with their goddamn hats on. That still just makes me furious. Krugman closes his column with this. He says, I don't fully understand where this aversion to the basic rules of a civilized society is coming from. Let me pause. Paul, I can tell you where it's coming from. It's coming from fascist Christianity. Now, that's not the teachings of the rabbi from Nazareth, as you would understand, Krugman, being Jewish. But I'm talking about how they have taken the supposed message from Jesus of Nazareth and turned it into a violent, destructive, vicious, murderous ideology. So that's where it's coming from. But as a Jew, I know you can't just come out and say it, can you? Well, I'm not a Jew. I was raised a Christian, and I can say it. I know where this is coming from, Paul. It's coming from this filthy, perverted Christianity that passes as a religion of Jesus Christ. But he goes on. He says, even though he doesn't fully understand where this is coming from, he said, what is clear is that the very people who shout the most about freedom are doing their best to turn this country into a Hunger Games type dystopian nightmare with checkpoints everywhere, loomed over by men with guns. May I add one word in a quick edit here, Mr. Krugman? A nightmare with checkpoints everywhere, loomed over by white men with guns. It's never going to be black men with guns until such time as it may come when the people of no color in this country say, you know, fuck it, we've had enough. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcasts. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com, and never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.